Picture this. You're a 19-year-old gunner fresh out of training at Las Vegas Army Airfield. You spent 6 months becoming an expert marksman. You can hit clay pigeons at 300 yards. Your instructors praised your steady trigger squeeze, your perfect sight picture, your ability to lead a moving target. Now you're at 25,000 feet over Germany in a B-17 Flying Fortress, and a Focke-Wulf 190 is screaming toward you at 400 miles per hour. You do exactly what you were trained to do. You track the target through your sights. You calculate the lead. You squeeze the trigger smoothly. Your tracers arc through the air, missing by what looks like a football field. The German fighter rolls away untouched. You've just fired 200 rounds and didn't touch him. Here's the truth that will make your blood boil. Your instructors knew this would happen. The Army Air Force knew this would happen. They trained you wrong anyway. Not because they were incompetent, not because they didn't care, but because they were teaching you the only way they knew how, using marksmanship principles that dated back 1,000 years. Principles that worked perfectly for every war in human history until now. Picture this from the other side. You're a Luftwaffe fighter ace. You're diving on an American bomber formation, and you're actually relieved you've learned that American gunners are trained marksmen. That's exactly why they keep missing. They aim carefully, track precisely, and fire at exactly where you are. By the time their bullets arrive, you're somewhere else. It's like fighting opponents who telegraph every punch. Their skill is predictable. Their training makes them easy to kill. But today, something's different. The tracers aren't following you anymore. They're not aimed at your aircraft at all. The Americans are spraying bullets into empty sky, at nothing, everywhere, all at once. It looks like panic. It looks like they've given up. Then your wingman's fighter disintegrates. Then another, then another. The Americans aren't missing anymore, and you realize with growing horror, they've stopped aiming entirely August 17, 1943, the date American bomber crews would remember as Black Thursday. 376 B-17 Flying Fortresses attacked Schweinfurt, Germany. By sunset, 60 were shot down. Another 95 would never fly again. Over 600 American airmen were dead or missing. The gunners on surviving bombers claimed 288 German fighters destroyed. Luftwaffe records showed the actual number, 27. American gunners were missing more than 90% of their targets. Farm boys from Iowa who could shoot ducks on the wing couldn't hit German fighters to save their lives. Literally. But here's what makes this story insane. The Army Air Force had known this would happen for over a year. Lieutenant Colonel Harold Bowman, who ran flexible gunnery training at Las Vegas, had written a classified report in January 1942, 7 months before most of these gunners even entered training. His words were prophetic and damning. "We are training our gunners to shoot rifles at 300 yards when they need to shoot shotguns at 30 feet. The entire foundation of our gunnery instruction is wrong. We're applying 19th century marksmanship principles to 20th century aerial combat. The boys we're sending to England are going to die because we're teaching them the wrong skills." His report was filed away and ignored. The training continued, unchanged. Thousands of young men learned to be expert marksmen, the exact wrong skill for the job that would kill them. Why? Because the alternative was unthinkable. It violated every principle of military shooting developed over a millennium. It went against every instinct, every tradition, every measure of a soldier's worth. The alternative was to stop aiming entirely. Technical Sergeant James Morrison, a former Cincinnati math teacher turned B-17 gunner, spent his spare time calculating the physics. His notebook, discovered decades later in the National Archives, contained pages of equations. His conclusion, written in frustration: "We're asking these kids to be calculating machines. We're demanding they solve differential equations in their heads while being shot at. It's impossible." The math was brutal. A Messerschmitt 109 attacking head-on closed at 600 miles per hour, 880 feet per second. A gunner had 2 seconds, maybe 3. In that time, he had to account for 14 variables: his plane speed, the fighter speed, altitude effects on bullet velocity, wind resistance, temperature, gravitational drop, parallax between his eye and the gun barrel. Staff Sergeant William Crossman, one of the few gunners to definitely destroy a fighter on Black Thursday, wrote, "I fired at 12 different aircraft. I destroyed one. The other 11, I might as well have been throwing rocks." The traditional training wasn't just ineffective, it was getting people killed, and the men in charge knew it. The solution came from the least likely source imaginable: a diminutive ball turret gunner who'd simply given up on everything he'd been taught. Master Sergeant Anthony Kowalski flew in the ball turret, that plexiglass bubble hanging beneath the B-17's belly. It was the most terrifying position on the aircraft. You curled into a fetal position surrounded by ammunition and hydraulic lines, with nothing between you and 25,000 feet of empty air but thin plastic. You couldn't wear a parachute. There was no room. If the turret jammed, you wrote it down. Maybe the constant proximity to death freed Kowalski from caring about doctrine. After 5 missions of carefully aimed fire that hit nothing, he abandoned his training entirely. He developed what he called the garden hose method. When German fighters approached, he simply sprayed bullets in their general direction, walking his tracers across empty sky like water from a hose, filling the air with lead and letting the Germans fly into it. His fellow gunners mocked him. They called him Spray and Pray Tony. Then came September 6, 1943, mission to Stuttgart. In 4 minutes, Kowalski shot down 2 Messerschmitt 100s and damaged a third so badly it was last seen trailing smoke. When intelligence officers debriefed him, he couldn't explain what he'd done. "I wasn't aiming at them," he said in his thick Chicago accent. "I wasn't tracking them or calculating lead. I was just filling the air where I thought they'd be. They flew into it like they were committing suicide on my bullet stream." This caught the attention of Major William Becker, a former MIT physics professor now serving with the 8th Air Force's Operational Research Section. Becker had been analyzing thousands of feet of combat camera footage, studying the geometry of every fighter attack and defensive response. What he discovered would change everything. In a report dated September 15, 1943, classified Most Secret, Becker wrote, "Our analysis of 1,247 combats reveals a disturbing truth. The most successful gunners are not the ones with the highest marksmanship scores from training. They're not the ones who carefully track targets through their sights. They are almost universally the ones who fire the most ammunition in the shortest possible time, regardless of traditional accuracy." What if, instead of trying to aim at where we think the enemy will be, we simply fill every place he could possibly be with bullets? What if we stop trying to achieve precision and instead pursue probability? The theoretical breakthrough came from Captain Robert Lindsay, a statistical analyst who'd worked as an insurance actuary before the war. Lindsay understood probability in ways traditional military officers didn't. At a meeting at 8th Air Force Headquarters on September 22, 1943, he presented his theory to a room full of skeptical senior officers, including General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force. "Gentlemen," Lindsay began, his voice shaking slightly, "insurance is about managing probability. So is shooting down German fighters. We cannot predict what any individual pilot will do, but we can predict with mathematical certainty what German pilots in aggregate will do. They follow patterns. They approach from specific angles because those angles offer the best combination of firepower and survivability. They attack at specific speeds because physics dictates those speeds. If we map these patterns statistically, we can predict not where a specific fighter will be, but where any fighter is most likely to be. We don't need to shoot down specific aircraft. We need to fill zones of maximum probability with bullets and let statistics do the killing." The room erupted. Colonel William Hall, a West Point graduate who'd been teaching marksmanship since 1928, stood up in rage. "This is absurd. You're asking us to abandon everything we know about gunnery. You're telling our boys to close their eyes and spray bullets like they're watering a garden." But General Eaker, who'd lost too many bombers to ignore any possibility, authorized a test. For 6 weeks at Eglin Field, Florida, technicians fired millions of rounds at radio-controlled target drones, mapping probability distributions under different firing patterns. The results, delivered November 28, 1943, were undeniable. Traditional aimed fire, 0.5% hit rate 1 hit per 200 rounds. Zone fire, filling predetermined areas with bullets, 4.2% hit rate, 1 hit per 24 rounds. 8 times more effective. Colonel Curtis LeMay, who would later architect the strategic bombing of Japan, grasped the implications immediately. On December 8, 1943, exactly 2 years after Pearl Harbor, he issued a radical new doctrine. Forget everything you learned in gunnery school. When a fighter approaches, don't aim at him. Don't try to track him. Don't calculate deflection. Aim at the space in front of your bomber where he has to fly to shoot at you. Fill that space with bullets. Create a wall of lead that he has to fly through. The technique was officially called zone firing or barrage fire. The gunners called it filling the bucket. The psychological shift was profound. Everything in a gunner's training, everything in his being, told him to aim at the enemy. But now they were being told to shoot at empty air. Second Lieutenant Arthur Goldman, a bombardier with the 381 bomb group who manned nose guns when not on his bomb run, wrote to his wife, "Everything in your training screams at you to aim. You see the fighter coming, wings sparkling with cannon fire, growing larger every second. Your brain demands you track him, lead him, shoot him down. But we're being told to ignore him and shoot where he isn't yet. It feels insane. It feels like giving up. But the mathematics say it works." The transformation of training was immediate and total. The 6 flexible gunnery schools across America, Las Vegas, Buckingham, Tyndall, Harlingen, Fort Myers, and Kingman, have been churning out thousands of gunners per month teaching traditional marksmanship overnight. The entire curriculum was revolutionized. Master Sergeant Frank Rodriguez, an instructor at Las Vegas Army Airfield, remembered the chaos. We had kids, 18, 19 years old, who'd been learning breath control, sight picture, trigger squeeze, all the fundamentals going back to the Revolutionary War. Then overnight, we're telling them to forget it all and spray bullets at empty air. Some thought we'd gone crazy. Hell, some of us instructors thought we'd gone crazy too. Out went traditional marksmanship. In came probability theory, German fighter approach patterns, rate of fire maximization, the Waller gunnery trainer, a sophisticated simulator that projected films of attacking fighters, was completely reprogrammed. Previously, it rewarded accurate tracking. Now it rewarded volume of fire in specific zones, regardless of whether a fighter was actually there. The most counterintuitive technique was called position firing. Due to the bomber's forward motion, bullets were pushed ahead of where the gun was aimed. The solution seemed insane. If a fighter attacked from the side at 3 o'clock, aim behind it. At 4 o'clock or even 5 o'clock, let the bomber's speed carry bullets into the fighter's path. Staff Sergeant Leonard Morrison of the 95th Bomb Group described his first success with position firing on November 26, 1943. This 109 came in from 300 level. Every instinct told me to lead him, to aim ahead like duck hunting. Instead, I aimed behind him, way behind, almost at our own tail. It felt completely wrong. Then I watched my tracers curve forward through the air. The 109 flew right into them. His plane just came apart. The mathematics were codified in a remarkable 47-page manual called Get That Fighter, classified and distributed only to instructors. Unlike traditional military manuals filled with procedures, it read like a physics textbook. Equations, probability tables, statistical distributions. Its introduction stated bluntly, when a fighter is making his attack, you don't aim ahead. Always aim between him and the tail of your own plane because the forward speed of your plane is added to the speed of your bullet. The impact on German fighter tactics was immediate and devastating. By December 1943, Luftwaffe pilots were reporting a terrifying change in American defensive fire. Major Gunther Rall, a top ace with 275 eventual victories, noted in a tactical report dated December 15, 1943. The Americans have abandoned aimed fire for area saturation. Individual bombers no longer track us with their guns. Instead, they create zones of fire that we must fly through to attack. Our standard approaches are becoming untenable. We are losing experienced pilots to what appears to be random fire, but is actually carefully calculated probability zones. The Germans called it flying into rain, because that's what it felt like, unavoidable, everywhere, and deadly. Lieutenant Colonel Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most successful fighter leaders, would later write in his memoirs, by winter 1943, the Americans had discovered something we Germans, with our emphasis on individual skill and precision, had missed entirely. In modern aerial combat at these speeds and altitudes, statistical probability beats individual marksmanship every time. They turn their gunners into probability weapons, and we couldn't counter it with skill alone. The proof came during Big Week. February 20th to 25th, 1944, the 8th Air Force launched Operation Argument, its most intensive bombing campaign to date. Over 6 days, American bombers flew 3,300 sorties against German aircraft factories. Despite facing the full strength of the Luftwaffe, bomber losses were dramatically lower than the October 1943 disasters. More importantly, German losses were catastrophic. Over 350 aircraft destroyed, 100 experienced pilots killed, another 150 wounded or captured. Technical Sergeant Raymond Johnson, a tail gunner with the 447th Bomb Group, shot down 3 fighters during Big Week without once specifically aiming at any of them. His after-action report: "I just kept filling my assigned zone with lead whenever fighters appeared. I never tracked a single target, never put my sight on a specific aircraft. I just kept the triggers down and filled my zone. The fighters flew into it like moths into a flame." But the psychological cost was real. Many gunners felt disconnected from their victories, as if they hadn't really earned them. Staff Sergeant Paul Williams of the 96th Bomb Group wrote home in March 1944, "I shot down a Focke-Wulf yesterday, but I don't feel like I did it. I was just hosing bullets into empty air where the mathematics said to shoot, and he happened to fly into them. There's no satisfaction in it. We're not warriors anymore. We're probability machines." By March 1944, the data was overwhelming. Bombers using zone firing were 3.7 times more likely to destroy attacking fighters and 2.1 times more likely to survive their missions. Average ammunition per confirmed kill had actually decreased from 12,600 rounds to 7,800 rounds. The Germans knew they were beaten. A captured Luftwaffe tactical directive from March 1944 explicitly warned pilots the American bombers no longer engage in aimed defensive fire. They create zones of impenetrable bullet density at calculated points around their formations. Standard attack protocols must be abandoned. Franz Stiegler, the Luftwaffe pilot famous for escorting a damaged B-17 to safety in December 1943, later reflected on the change. In 1943, you could still fight American bombers with skill and courage. By 1944, skill meant nothing. Their defensive fire had become so dense, so mathematically distributed, that attacking them was pure chance. You weren't fighting gunners anymore. You were fighting probability itself. The revolution reached its peak with the B-29 Superfortress and its central fire control system. Instead of individual gunners controlling guns, a central computer calculated firing solutions for all guns simultaneously. Creating mathematically optimized zones of fire, gunners became sensor operators, designating targets for mathematical engagement. Major Saburo Sakai, Japan's leading surviving ace with 64 confirmed victories, described attacking B-29s in early 1945. "It was like flying into a mathematical equation. The Americans had reduced aerial gunnery to pure mathematics. They calculated every possible approach angle and filled it with bullets. There was no path through based on skill or courage, only luck. We weren't fighting men anymore. We were fighting probability itself." The final statistics tell the story of transformation. August 1943. Before zone firing, over 10% loss rate per mission. Some groups suffered 50% losses, gunners claiming hundreds of kills but destroying fewer than 1 in 10. Spring 1945, with statistical gunnery, under 1% loss rate per mission. Hit rates improved from 0.5% to nearly 5%. A 10-fold improvement based entirely on abandoning traditional marksmanship. The revolution's legacy extends far beyond World War II. The principle of statistical engagement became fundamental to modern warfare. The phalanx close-in weapon system on naval vessels today, it creates walls of bullets and predicted threat paths. Exactly like those B-17 gunners, the Patriot missile system, it calculates probability intercept zones rather than precise interceptions. Israel's Iron Dome, statistical interdiction zones. Every modern defensive system based on probability rather than precision traces its ancestry to those young Americans who learned to stop aiming and trust mathematics. Dr. Robert McNamara, who served as a statistical analyst with the 8th Air Force before becoming Secretary of Defense, reflected in 1962. The zone firing revolution of 1943 to 44 was the first practical application of operations research to combat. We proved that statistical analysis could be more effective than individual skill. It was the beginning of systems analysis in warfare, the start of the mathematical approach to military problems that would eventually lead to computer-controlled combat systems. But let's not forget the human dimension. Thousands of young Americans raised on stories of frontier marksmen, taught from childhood that skill with a firearm measured a man's worth, had to abandon these deeply held beliefs. They had to fire at empty air while German fighters bore down on them, believing that probability would protect them better than their own aimed Fire Staff Sergeant William Crawford, who flew 35 missions as a waist gunner, reflected years later. We went from being gunners to being probability implementers. It was hard to accept at first. Every instinct screamed at us to aim, but the math worked. More of us came home because we trusted statistics instead of our instincts. Between 1941 and 1945, the Army Air Forces trained approximately 176,000 flexible gunners. By war's end, virtually all had been trained in zone firing. The early emphasis on traditional marksmanship, breath control, sight picture, trigger squeeze, had been completely replaced by probability zones, position firing, and rate of fire maximization. American industry produced over 1.5 billion rounds of .50 caliber ammunition during the war. The average B-17 carried 11,000 rounds per mission. During major raids, American gunners could put over 20 million bullets into the air in a single day. It was industrial warfare at its most literal. Mass production of probability delivered at 2,800 feet per second. So yes, they were trained wrong, not maliciously, but because the military was teaching the only way it knew how, using principles that had worked for 1,000 years but had become obsolete overnight. The revolution that saved countless American lives required abandoning everything soldiers believed about combat. It required trusting mathematics over instinct, probability over precision, statistics over skill. These young Americans proved that sometimes the most counterintuitive solution is the most effective, that abandoning everything you believe might be the key to victory, and that in the age of industrial warfare, mathematics had become the deadliest weapon of all. They participated in one of history's most profound military transformations, a revolution that echoes through every computer-controlled weapon system, every automated defense network, every algorithm-driven military technology today. They proved that victory belongs not to the best marksmen, but to those who best understand probability. They turned warfare from an art into a science, from individual skill into statistical optimization. And in doing so, they didn't just win a war. They transformed the very nature of combat itself, ushering in an age where mathematics would increasingly determine the outcome of battles, where computers would replace human judgment, and where statistical probability would become the ultimate arbiter of life and death in the skies above the battlefield.